Welcome to this month's Third Thursday webinar, brought to you by Synergy Settlement Services. The Third Thursday webinar is part of an ongoing free monthly webinar series. Each presentation is done by a Synergy subject matter expert who will tackle difficult issues that arise at settlement. During today's presentation, if you have questions, type them into the control panel where it says Questions. The following brief presentation will give you an overview of what Synergy does in 30 seconds.
A trial lawyer's job isn't to know all the nuances, to know what it takes to keep Medicaid in place or SSI and preserve Medicare and comply with the Medicare Secondary Payer Act and resolve these complicated liens that may be present. So all of those issues are issues that the trial lawyer really doesn't have the time or the expertise to deal with. They need a partner that they can rely upon that can handle all of those issues, and that's exactly what Synergy is.
Hello, everybody. This is Anthony Prito. I am one of the partners at Synergy Settlement Services, and I want to take this time to thank you all for joining us and spending part of your lunch hour with me to listen to one of our Third Thursday settlement planning topics. Today is going to be a little bit different. We are going to walk through a piece of a larger presentation. We are going to talk about liquidity and what that means when you are doing some planning for your clients. So as always, I have a pretty detailed PowerPoint that has got a lot of text in there. We will have that available to anyone that wants to have a version of that afterwards that they can use as a resource. So please contact our office and we will have that sent over to you as a PDF so that you can utilize it in the future. As you know, Synergy Settlement Services was started about 10 years ago as primarily a structured settlement firm, and now we handle all sorts of complicated issues at the end of a case. We help clients not only manage their settlement proceeds, we work with them to handle any sort of lien resolution aspects that they have. We help attorneys defer their fees. We utilize our pooled special needs trust and our foundation to act as a trustee on those. And then we handle all sorts of Medicare compliance and life care planning. So today we're going to talk about liquidity, what that means, how that is part of the settlement plan, how we utilize that in our plans, and how you make sure that if you're a trustee on this call or a settlement planner, that you have enough liquidity when you settle a case so that those helping out the injured victim and their family have the ability to buy goods and services for them when they need to buy them. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of run through the definition of liquidity. Investopedia defines liquidity as a degree to with which an asset can be quickly bought or sold in the market without affecting the asset's price. Cash is typically considered the most liquid asset. Just understanding liquidity, there are a lot of items that are liquid, but if their price is affected when you sell them to cash, that essentially makes them, there's a degree of risk involved in their liquidity. So liquid assets are relatively conservative. They're typically the most conservative asset that you can own. Right now in the marketplace, they are not earning much interest. So you all see how your checking, savings, money markets, and CD type accounts are doing. They are typically earning low interest because there is no upside potential or downside risk with those. So they typically earn little to no interest in the marketplace, and even in high interest rate markets over the last 20 years, the most that these types of assets are earning is 3 to 4%. So what does that, essentially mean? Liquid assets are used to meet ongoing and emergency needs without needing to sell something to pay for it. So your checking account is typically the most accessible source of buying goods and services. So people use their debit card, they withdraw cash to pay for things, they write checks to pay for things. So when you utilize those types of ways to pay for a good or service, you are not having a actual charge associated with using it. Your investment account would not be considered a liquid asset other than the cash that's held in there, because if you own a stock or a bond, even a CD typically would have some sort of charge affiliated with liquidating that asset to pay for it if you don't hold it the full term of the agreement. So most withdrawals in investment accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETF positions, all of those would require you to actually sell something to convert to cash, and that's where the risk is involved for your clients. The main reason you need to have liquid assets is because people are buying and selling things all the time. So your clients need to pay for their ongoing services that are at their household. They need to pay for their household. They need to buy food. They need to pay for things like shelter. All the common expenses that you and I have, your beneficiaries have those as well. So typically, you and I are non-injury victims. So what we're using is cash or credit. Credit is another form of a liquid asset. The problem with credit is if you don't have the liquidity to pay your bill at the end of the month, it becomes a bad way to actually purchase assets. But these are the two most common ways that things are purchased in today's market. And the reason you really need liquidity is because if you need to buy something, so if your client settles a case and they have ongoing needs and they need to purchase something and their money is tied up in a stock account, it's not really an option for them to sell it if it's a down market. So you need to have funds that are available with the understanding that they're not going to be earning a ton of interest and that they're available to pay for those ongoing expenses and emergency expenses that pop up for your clients. So there is a cost to having liquidity, and the cost of that is that the assets that are held in liquid accounts, so the assets that are held in your checking account or money market, are not earning the same amount of interest they would earn in vehicles that are illiquid. So there's a cost to being liquid. The cost is a loss of interest typically in those liquid assets that you have. The other cost that you could have is if you are too illiquid, meaning you don't have cash in your checking or money market or an ability to charge something while you create the liquidity that you need, you could sell a share of something that is already at a loss, and then you have an instant impact of that loss because you no longer own that share, and that share no longer has the ability to recover and go back up. So there's a little bit different aspects to doing financial planning for someone in general versus doing financial planning for someone that is receiving a legal settlement. And the first main difference is that most people earning a legal settlement don't have the ability to go back and earn income like they did when they were a wage earner. They typically have been in a situation where they've incurred debt. They have been in a litigation type system for 1 to 4 years. They have probably accumulated more debt that they want. They have earned less income due to the accident that they were a part of. So they don't have paychecks. And that's the way most people pay for things. So you and I have paychecks that come in, they're deposited into our account, and then we use that as our liquid asset to pay for our ongoing expenses. Typically, a retail client would have some sort of emergency fund or access to credit to pay for things that are not happening on an ongoing basis. So, your refrigerator goes out, your air conditioner breaks, those large unforeseen costs are typically not paid for with ongoing income, but they're paid for through savings that happen from that ongoing income. So most people in the marketplace can create current and ongoing liquidity with their actual paychecks. For an injury victim that's actually receiving a settlement, so if it's in a trust, if it is just a general plan where someone has received X amount of dollars and they're creating a plan for themselves with a settlement planner, or vice versa, if there's a trustee that is helping manage those assets, typically what happens in the beginning, the plaintiff will have a lot of expenses that are going to happen immediately, whether they need a new vehicle, they need to situate their living arrangements, if they need to modify the living arrangements, if they have some back debt that was created by their inability to earn income over the past few years, those things have to be paid for essentially at the beginning. So in addition to creating that monthly income when a plan is settled, that will help them with ongoing liquidity, they have got to set aside money right off the bat to get them back to square one, so that they're in a comfortable living arrangement. They have got a safe vehicle that they can transport themselves around in. So those things are actually paid for right off the bat, and they typically should not be included in the settlement plan because they're going to come in and go out right away. And that's a little bit different than what would happen with a retail person. They're not going to get a large lump sum to handle those things. They're going to have to save on their own to make those payments. So I like to spread liquidity into two different things. The first thing is immediate liquidity, and that's what we mentioned in the previous slide. Those are the funds that are going to come into a settlement, and then they are going to go out immediately. So those things that need to be paid for, debt, anything that's going to be paid for in the first 2 years, so 2 years of income, and anything that's going to go out in those first 2 years of a major expense, to help get the client back to square one and into a really good, comfortable living arrangement. We think that those 2 years of assets, the immediate funds, and then a percentage of the net settlement should be set aside and be immediately liquid, meaning that money goes into a separate account, a cash, savings account, a checking account, and it's utilized by the trustee or by the plaintiff to actually pay for all their living arrangements those first 24 months. So any upfront things they need to do and any ongoing living things they need to do. So that would include the major purchases and then whatever they need on a monthly basis multiplied out by the 24 months that we're talking about. And then a separate calculation that we typically tell clients is they want to put 5 to 10% of their net settlement up to a certain threshold into very safe, conservative assets that will have no cost to liquidity. Ongoing liquidity, meaning the money that they need in years 3 and into the future, can be established through a variety of different sources. So in the legal settlement community, a lot of times that is done by ongoing payments from a structured settlement. You could utilize shorter term CDs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year CD durations. Other fixed annuity type options like equity index annuities that have shorter back-end fees on them. You can also utilize bonds, municipal income, things like that will create ongoing income that actually will act as the paycheck for the beneficiaries, or if you're the trustee, that will act as income for the trust that will be making those payments. We recommend these investments pay to the plaintiff on an annual basis in advance. So when we do our planning, we like to create income that comes in on January 1st that will meet the needs for the client for the next 12 months. So it creates a little bit safer type of liquidity. The money comes in. The downside risk to that is if they don't manage the money, or as a trustee or guardian, if that money is not managed appropriately over the year, it could be utilized quicker than that 12-month period. I also like to point out during when we're talking to clients or trustees about the settlement plan that we're putting together, just an understanding that currently rates in liquid assets are extremely low. So right now, the rates in a high-end checking and savings account are typically right around 1%. There's different ways to manipulate that with the various banks in local areas, but they're usually bonus rates where we can maybe get 1.5% to 2% for a 6-month period. But for just talking about it with clients as a trustee or guardian or an attorney, just letting them understand that, look, the money that is going to be safe for you is not going to be earning a high interest rate because it's safe. And those funds typically, even on a higher end, a CD that has a lower duration, so 5 years or less, average about 2.5%. So like we talked about earlier, it's just a good idea to bring this up and talk about how those rates look. So that when a client is utilizing these types of vehicles, they understand that the money they put into these products and services are not going to be earning 10% a year, but they're also not going to be losing any money. They are set to earn a varying rate of interest that's in the marketplace, but it should not go down ever, and it should not, be utilized as a growth type asset. So when we talk about what you should do with the funds when a settlement plan is created, we've already talked about that first phase, which is as a piece of the pie, parceling out that money that's going to be used for immediate needs or anything in the first 2 years. Typically that goes into a checking or money market account and is paid to zero or spent to zero within that 24-month period. Hopefully you've done your plan right, and those funds are able to get everything accomplished that the beneficiary or the plaintiff needs. And then you look at how do you fund years 3 and ongoing. So the money should be there for the first few years, and then you should be planning with the remaining assets how you spend or how you invest those to create spendable income for the client moving forward. One of the things that we have done in the past that are easier to do, that don't have costs associated with them, are staggered CDs. And typically, as you look at a duration or the length of a CD term, The longer that money is put into a CD, the higher the rate of the return is. So if you stagger those between the years you need funds, you can, earn a little bit higher interest the longer you're able to do that. You can do the same thing with bond portfolios. So if you're working with a licensed investment advisor, you can do the same exact approach through municipal bonds and other bond portfolios. There's typically not much risk with a bond portfolio that is held for duration, which means if you buy a 3-year bond and you hold it to duration, you're going to get the interest that they are prescribing to you on the front end, and you're going to get your principal back. When there is a little bit of risk with bonds would be when you need to sell the bond. So if you cannot hold it to duration and you do sell, and there's a fluctuation in interest rates between the time you buy it and sell, you could have a loss of principal if you have to sell when interest rates have risen, so your actual bond price is lower than it was when you purchased it. Another common source of annual income is an annual payment from a structured settlement. So someone can utilize a structured settlement that has a lump sum that comes in every January, and then the guardian, the trustee, or the plaintiff can actually use those funds for their ongoing payments. The structured settlement, similar. It cannot be bought or sold without incurring a loss. So the only way to manipulate a structured settlement payments, the future payments, would be to sell those future payments to somebody else, and that typically creates a loss to the client. So you want to make sure whatever is put into a bond or structured settlement has the ability to be held the duration that you need it. The other option, which we commonly do inside the investment accounts that we have or in our trust accounts, is we use automatic rebalancing of portfolios. So as the cash portion of a portfolio dwindles, we'll rebalance and sell the stocks out that are high, buy the stocks that are at a lower point, and replenish the cash on an annual basis to create that liquidity ongoing. The real reason we're talking about this is because we have seen in the past where people have become illiquid right off the bat, where they get enticed to higher interest rates and sales practices in the marketplace where no one is talking to them about what happens when the market goes down, because we're in such a drastically increasing market over the last 5 to 10 years. So it's almost where the historical lessons we were taught during the last market downturns have disappeared. So it's really important that a client earns liquid assets and that you have enough liquid assets to make sure that payments can be made. And it's for 2 reasons. You don't want to be too liquid, because then you do lose out on upside potential. And you don't want to be too illiquid, because you could sell at a loss and incur a real loss. So for every $100,000, if you can earn an extra 1%, that's $1,000 that your client has of spendable income. So making sure that you are liquid enough, but not too liquid, is very important, because you want every dollar working as hard for that beneficiary as the trial lawyers work to get them the money, as a trustee works to make sure that they have money, and as a planner works to make sure that they have money ongoing. So for every $100,000, if you can earn 1% more interest, that's another $1,000 a year the client has. But conversely, if you have to sell a share of $100,000 and you sell it for $99,000, that client's now lost $1,000 of income, and that $1,000 of real loss, which creates a loss of income ongoing for that client. So I see this slide here. I thought it was cute. It's just showing you that it's a hard equation to do, and it's really hard to balance the scales in this. You probably are always going to be a little bit more liquid than you want if you're conservative. And if you're not someone that is going to take ongoing and annual looks at a client's account balances, and they're doing this on their own, they may become too illiquid, and in that situation, they've got the real risk. So it's hard to determine whether being too liquid or less liquid is more of a risk, but both sides have inherent risks to them. So I've dropped this slide in here. This is a really powerful slide that Pacific Life, which is one of the insurance companies in the structured settlement industry, put together, and it shows a investment stream with withdrawals coming out on an annual basis, 2 different ways. And it shows you from a period of 1989 to 2008, which represented really good average annual returns from the S&P 500 index of 10.36, that it can be a really powerful tool. The $200,000 can create a lot of income for a client, and that 10.36 return creates a good balance for the client at the end. And what they did was said, what would have happened if we switched this? Because 2006, 7, and 8, when the market started to have some substantial corrections, what if the client would have started at that point and gone back the other way? So the average rate of return is exactly the same. It's a 10.36. The years are the same. They just inverted the years to show what happens when a client puts money in at the wrong time. And I think it's important because we never know, as an advisor, as an attorney, as a CPA, as a trustee or a guardian, which way the market is going. Every day the market has a 50% chance of going up and a 50% chance of going down. So it's hard to tell a client that, even though the average annual return of the market historically is high, it really impacts them specifically based on when they put money into the actual market. So in this, it shows Investor A, who did the traditional investment. They put their $200,000 in. They received money in terms of money coming out. And at the end, the $200,000 had turned into $883,000. And they still have money inside the account. The year-end balance after that 20-year period is $614,000. When you look at the green column and you invert it and you take those exact returns but flip them, and the client puts in the same amount of money, having a staggering loss in the first few years while you're withdrawing money is a severe penalty. And you can see at the end, this client's $200,000 still grew, and they were able to see $39,000 of appreciation in there, but they have no more money ongoing. So it's a completely different event. It's a completely different outcome, but it's the same exact market, just inverted. And it shows you that there are some staggering consequences to people that are illiquid and have to take money out of investment accounts. So we just advise that investment accounts are not used for ongoing expenses. They are used for growth so that you do not have this sort of issue in year one. If this client had a 37% market correction in year one with their $200,000, they would have had a much lower balance at the end of the year. But if they were not withdrawing funds, so if they did not take out the $10,000, that would be a pure paper loss, meaning that every stock that they bought on the front end they still owned, it would have the ability to recover and get back to its basis and hopefully increase from there. So as long as you're not using those funds, investment accounts are paper losses and paper gains until we have to sell. So the paper losses are okay unless we have to sell to be liquid, and the paper gains are okay and should be utilized actually to create future liquidity for the client. So you just want to make sure that you're monitoring those accounts, meeting with your advisor, or if you're the advisor, meeting with the client and beneficiary or trustee, and walking through how the market did in that portion of a portfolio and checking to make sure you don't need to create liquidity at the end of that year to handle ongoing future expenses. So the best ways, that we think on the front end what you should be doing is really take steps to limit any sort of liquidity risk. Make sure you don't have too much liquid or too little liquid. Create a stream of recurring automatic income that comes in that is going to replenish the liquidity that you spend the prior year. Make sure that you are meeting with the trustee, the beneficiary, the guardian, everybody that's involved to analyze any future changes that are going to happen that create major expenses. So, if a vehicle is on the last legs, if a house needs updated modifications, if there's going to be some ongoing future things, you've got to plan ahead and make sure that you're liquid and have the ability to pay for those. We like to say rebudget annually, reassess the plan annually, and reallocate and rebalance when necessary. Just make sure that you're looking at things ongoing because, we've seen in the past where a client is very liquid at the beginning. They deplete the liquidity over that first 2 years. The investment account does great and is much higher at the end of 2 years, but they haven't actually replenished the liquidity with the gains they've had in the investment account. So, make sure that you replenish the liquidity, that it's always looked at and monitored to make sure that those funds are available and accessible to the client or the trustee or the guardian, those that are actually paying for the expenses. So that's how we kind of look at the liquidity. It is the first major piece of the pie. When you're creating a plan, you have got to carve out the money that is going to go out. A good comparison to how that is done is for all of those of you on the call that have seen Medicare set-asides, when Medicare, the federal government, looks at a plan, they make a client actually allocate 2 years worth of future medical expenses on the front end of that Medicare set-aside. So they are telling a client to allocate those funds upfront and make sure they're accessible for 2 years and then have ongoing payments into it. So a settlement plan is not much different than that. It's not very complex. You want to just allocate for the money that is going to be going out on the front end and allocate for the ongoing future expenses. Now, unlike a Medicare set-aside that has defined payments and we know the expenses of that Medicare set-aside allocation, a settlement plan is obviously going to change. The beneficiary's needs are going to change. Their family needs are going to change. Their expenses are going to fluctuate. They're going to have emergency expenses that pop up. So those things just have to be looked at ongoing and to make sure that you are monitoring a plan and making sure that they're looking at their future and planning with you so that you can just kind of create the best plan for them. Because like I said, being too illiquid or too liquid both have downsides for the beneficiary and for yourself. So make sure that you just stay on top of it, monitor it appropriately, make changes when necessary, and just have those good open dialogues and lines of communication with your clients so that they know exactly what is going on as you move forward. And again, I just want to reiterate that Synergy does all sorts of things at the end of a case and throughout a case for trial lawyers. We've got experts in all those departments, and if you want or have any questions or would like to get a hard copy of the PowerPoint, we can have that sent over to you guys after the presentation. So I want to thank you for spending the last 20 to 25 minutes with me. If you do have questions and you want to email those over to us, we can get back to you or set up a separate call. So thank you very much for taking the time with me today, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.